You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the right to sell your bodily organs. Every year, around 1,000 people in Britain will die waiting for an organ transplant. Right now, it's estimated that more than 10,000 people in the UK are currently waiting for an organ. Research out yesterday in the Lancet Medical Journal showed that 10% of grieving families are blocking thousands of potentially life-saving organ donations. So, what is a solution to a shortage of organs? Last year, leading surgeons called on the government to consider the benefits of allowing people to sell their organs. They argue that giving people the right to sell their organs could save thousands of lives. But critics say that the commodification of organs could lead to the exploitation of poor and vulnerable people who are under pressure because of financial problems. Well, joining me in the studio is Professor Nadey Hakim, a transplantation surgeon. Simon Rippon is a research fellow at the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Nick Triggle is the health correspondent for the BBC. And joining us on the phone is Roger Goff from Patient Concern, a campaign group promoting choice for all users of the National Health Service. Simon Rippon from the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Should people be allowed to sell their organs?
Well, if this is a question about whether people who should be allowed to sell their organs as living donors, then my answer is probably not. And the reason for that is because I'm concerned about people essentially being pressured to sell their organs. So we have all kinds of protections in all kinds of spheres. So, for example, there are protections about having minimum sickness days and vacation days, maximum working hours, minimum wages, things like that. And the reason we put these protections in place is because the people, without them, people would be in a very poor negotiating position. And I think lots of poor people are in a poor negotiating position about the things that they can sell. And giving them the option or imposing on them the option to sell their organs could harm a substantial number of people.
Professor Nadey Hakim.
Well, I agree with Simon that obviously there are harms associated with selling because, first of all, you've got inadequate counselling and screening of patients, the donors, misinformation, shoddy medical work and lack of aftercare and outright cheating when you sell your organs. However, why is it so? Now, compensation is not subject to the stringent controls applied to donation. And such controls are impossible to impose as long as compensation is illegal. So the best way, therefore, and that's where I disagree with Simon, is therefore to regulate the trade to make sure donors are properly compensated and treated.
Nick Triggle, health correspondent for the BBC.
Well, as you can see, this is becoming a growing and more important debate. I mean, the World Health Organization looked at the trade in black market organs earlier this year, and they actually estimated that there were 10,000 transplant operations each year involving black market organs, and these were sort of mainly done, they believed, in countries such as China, India, and Pakistan. So there is a lot of interest in this, and clearly it's an issue.
Roger Goff from Patient Concern.
Our position at Patient Concern is that transplantation is founded on the principle of a completely altruistic gift, and any alternatives are undesirable because they're likely to undermine trust and confidence in transplantation. We object not merely to the notion of people being invited to sell their organs. We also object, of course, to people being lent on the basis that they are giving consent when they haven't, presumed consent as it's known as, because that also is a cheat.
Simon Rippon from the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Is it morally right for someone to sell their organs? Because proponents say this will boost the supply of organs and help solve a national shortage.
Yeah, here's where I disagree with Roger Goff. I don't think there's anything wrong with selling an organ. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with doing that. And to say that altruism is important here is it's questionable. There are lives on the line, and altruism is a good thing, and we ought to promote it. But thinking that we ought to let people die just for the sake of preserving altruism seems to me to be the wrong way to think about these things. But I do think that sometimes giving an option to people can harm them, and giving an option to people to sell their organs can harm them. What we don't want is for people to be under any kind of pressure to sell their organs. And the people who actually want to sell their organs are almost always people who are under economic pressure. People don't want to sell their organs to buy fine wine and take flying lessons. They want to sell their organs to do things like pay off debts. And we don't want to put people under pressure to sell these kinds of things under those kinds of conditions.
Professor Nadey Hakim, this is quite crucial to it, isn't it? Informed consent. Can someone really give their informed consent to selling their organs if they're coming from financial pressures?
Of course, it's not because you are poor that you're not intelligent. You know what you want to do. I mean, listening to what Roger Goff said, I mean, he is an opponent of that system because he thinks that it will inevitably replicate the sins of the black market. Now, this is, I believe, utterly backward, because the remedy to this corrupt and unregulated system of exchange is its mirror image, a regulated and transparent regime devoted to donor protection. I mean, I personally, I'm against selling anything. Of course, I would love to give everything I have, but some people do not. You have to compensate them. This is priceless. I say, and I repeat many times, I would not give my kidney even if you give me £10 million. I wouldn't give it to you. I don't want to go through this major surgery. I do it every day. But someone who comes to you and says, please, I want to offer my kidney, giving him $1,000, £2,000, whatever it is nothing. It is priceless. Believe me, I know. I do it every day. The kidney is priceless. No dialysis machine can replace a kidney. Impossible. Someone comes through the door, tells you, I'm going to give you a kidney. Saying thank you to him is nothing. And this is why some countries the government offers the money legally. This is where you protect that poor donor from being abused by the nasty surgeons in those countries.
But aren't their judgments clouded by the incentives that they're given? If they're given the opportunity for £50,000, £100,000 for a kidney?
Exactly. This is why you should stop it. You should tell them it will be only £2,000-3,000 or whatever. There's a limit. The government tells you, you get this present from me to you, which was only 3,000 and not 5 million. I mean, I was reading on the internet, I don't know whether Nick saw this earlier, but there was some scandals in the States where somebody was offering $5 million for a kidney.
Roger Goff, we'll bring you in here from Patient Concern. What are your thoughts about what Professor Nadey Hakim just had to say?
Our big worry is that there is no way of guaranteeing that somebody who purportedly is freely selling their organ hasn't in fact been pressurized by members of the family. And what we need to remember is that taking organs from someone is a high-risk process which may end up in them being permanently or seriously damaged or even worse.
Some organ transplants will be low risk. Not all are high risk.
You can possibly call transplants a low-risk procedure, and the worry we have is that the families may end up with, for example, the main breadwinner permanently disabled, and who is going to look after them? The consequences for the exchequer could be horrendous.
Professor Nadey Hakim, the exchequer picking up the pieces.
I have to say, I'll speak as a surgeon. What Roger is saying here is not correct. This is precisely why those transplants have to be done in first-class hospitals where we look after our donors. The risk of damaging anyone is less than 1 in 5,000, a donor. They will live perfectly well for the rest of their lives. And talking about pressurizing members of the family. Now, how do you know if a husband giving his wife a kidney she has not offered him in exchange a flat in Mallorca? How do you know that a donor, a young boy giving a kidney to his father, he has not offered him a share in his company? Is this pressurizing? Of course not. This is freedom. In the same context, somebody who is offering you a kidney for only a small amount as a compensation to say thank you is absolutely acceptable.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the right to sell your bodily organs. Joining me in the studio is Professor Nadey Hakim, a transplantation surgeon. Simon Rippon is a research fellow at the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Nick Triggle is a health correspondent for the BBC. And joining us over the phone is Roger Goff from Patient Concern. Nick, let's bring you in here.
I think it's clearly true that if something's illegal and a black market develops trading in that commodity, as it has with organs, then it's not regulated, and that creates problems with the quality and safety of the operations, and with the sort of flow of money. I mean, there's been reports that people are paying well over £100,000 for a kidney, but that money doesn't, from what we know, get back to the person who's giving the organ. We've had reports of people only getting a few £1,000s maybe for their donation, when perhaps they've been promised a lot more. And in any unregulated market, you have these problems. And I think that's where the people who are in favour of legalising this in some way, that's where their argument lays. There is also an issue about, well, how do we increase the number of people on organ donation registers? There's a big debate. There's been a debate in the UK about this, whether we want to introduce an opt-out system, a system of presumed consent, where people specifically have to say, no, I don't want to give an organ. And in countries in Europe, like Spain and Belgium and Austria, the rates of consent are much higher. So there's another side to this debate about increasing organ donation across the board.
Simon Rippon from the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Nadey Hakim brought up this kind of difference between donation and selling your organs. Is there a difference?
I don't think there's a moral difference intrinsic to the act itself. And interestingly, some of Roger Goff's arguments about, say, he thinks it's dangerous to sell your organs. Well, it's equally dangerous to donate your organs, of course. So these arguments would count against donation as strongly as they do against selling organs. Now, none of us want organ transplantation to be impossible. However, Nadey Hakim's argument is that we should abandon regulation because when we have regulation, we get black markets. That's a universal argument when we talk about restrictions on markets. Black markets always develop to some extent when we try to introduce regulations, and we have to make empirical judgments about how well the regulations work and how well they can work. And my impression is that the black market in organ trading is not very significant. It's not very large. Most of the people who need organs in the UK, in countries like the UK, aren't going doing transplant tourism and going abroad to get organs from black markets. Most of them are waiting for donor organs in the UK.
What do you think about the answer that regulating the market will stop coercion and exploitation of vulnerable people?
Yeah. So there are different kinds of coercion. There's a kind of coercion where someone grabs your body and moves it, and then you have no control over what you're doing. And then there's a kind of coercion that exerts a kind of pressure on you, but it's a kind of weaker kind of coercion. So when your mortgage company says, if you don't keep up the repayments, your house will be repossessed, there's a kind of coercion involved there. You're not freely choosing to send them money every month to some degree. And this weaker kind of coercion is pretty much endemic to markets. It's endemic to markets where poor and desperate people are taking part in them in particular, and that's what I'm worried about in the organ market. There's also an interesting effect that's been measured, where if you introduce a market in something, if you introduce payments, people are less likely to donate altruistically. So this has been measured in blood donation markets. So where they introduced payments for blood, they found that fewer people were willing to give blood. Now that's surprising, isn't it? Because they seem to have an additional incentive added to what they already had. They not only could give blood if they felt altruistic and generous, but they also could get a financial reward. And you would think that would motivate more people to donate and increase the level of donations. Well, that doesn't happen. And the reason why it doesn't happen, I think, is because introducing payments changes the options that you're given. So when you introduce payments for organs will have a price. And don't expect people to continue to donate altruistically at the same rate as they are doing, when all they'll be doing is saving the NHS or the recipient some money.
Professor Nadey Hakim, what do you think about Sam Rippon's argument there?
Actually, I'd like to mention that in the US, there is financial reward for eggs, sperm, and blood. They offer them some money in exchange. It's not a lot of money, but they pay them to be donors. Now, it's true that a very small minority of patients, UK patients, will go abroad to have a transplant. But you have to remember that 10% of the entire world transplant numbers, which is around 63,000 transplants, are performed in China, Pakistan, Egypt, Colombia, and the Philippines. There's a lot of transplants. And a lot of those are illegal, because I can assure you that you have a lot of Americans, a lot of Dutch and other Europeans who fly to China to get organs from the Chinese donors who are prisoners, and their organs are procured for donation. Having been involved myself in the first 2 arm transplants in France, I can assure you all the arm transplants performed in China are, and I heard it from the transplant surgeons themselves, are from dead donors who are prisoners to get their organs, and in this particular respect, getting their arms.
You've argued before, Professor Hakim, that a properly regulated market would reduce or destroy the black market organ trade.
I think it would be effective if it's well controlled and organised by a third party such as the government or a charity. And you don't have to give them money. You see, this is the question. It's not money we're talking about. You can, instead of giving them money, offer them a life insurance, paying part of their mortgage. You're not giving them money directly. You're giving them something in exchange for that.
Is there a difference, though?
Yeah, because you know where the money's gone. They're not going to go and use it to buy drugs or, go on holiday. So you offer
Simon Rippon, do we care where the money's going? Or is it still an incentive?
Well, if you want to protect people from pressure to sell their organs, you don't want to be offering to pay off their debts, their mortgages, in exchange for donating their organs. Now, I'm not against some non-financial incentives. So there was a recent proposal to pay funeral expenses for people who signed up to the donor transplant list and then donated after death. That's a non-financial incentive to pay. And because in the UK we have a welfare system that pays funeral expenses for the poorest, this isn't going to put people under pressure to sign up. I think that kind of distinction is important.
Nick Triggle, let's have a look at this argument that by regulating the market we could possibly destroy the black market. Is that an argument that you would agree with?
Well, if we look at the reasons why any black market develops, it's either because the price of the commodity is too high or there's a shortage. In this case, there is a worldwide shortage. In many, many countries, there are thousands of people on waiting lists and many die a year. In the UK, there's 10,000 people currently waiting for an organ transplant. 1,000 of them will die this year. So the key is tackling that shortage. And in the UK, the government looked at this about 4 or 5 years ago, and it ruled out, it wasn't looking at legalising trade, it was looking at whether to introduce presumed consent, assuming everyone is an organ donor unless they opt out. But they actually said, no, we don't want to force, we don't want to coerce people. We would rather raise public awareness about this.
But that hasn't done enough at the moment, has it?
Well, it has started increasing the number of people on the organ organ donor register, it's gone up by 25%. Now, it's not as much as the government would like, and I think that it's only about 1 in 3 adults are on the organ donor register. But they've also started looking at other things. One of the things they introduced last year was to do with the driving licence application system, whereby people had to specifically state whether they wanted to go on the register or not. It's a so-called sort of nudge theory. It's forcing people to make that choice. And when they did this in a US state of Illinois, it actually almost doubled the rates of consent. So there's plenty of people who think we can actually solve this shortage by other means other than looking at a legal trade in organs.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the right to sell your bodily organs. Joining me in the studio is Professor Nadey Hakim, a transplantation surgeon. Simon Rippon is a research fellow at the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Nick Triggle is a health correspondent for the BBC. And joining us over the phone is Roger Goff from Patient Concern. Roger Goff, this regulated system whereby possibly the NHS could be the sole supplier and distributor. I'm looking at an argument here put forward by Professor Harris at Manchester Uni. He says that a regulated system where the NHS would be a supplier and distributor and the ability to pay wouldn't be a factor. How does that sound to you?
It's just a variation on the notion that it's all right to pay people to donate organs. We don't agree with that. The reason we're discussing this subject at all is because not enough people have voluntarily signed up to the organ donor register. We're told, of course, that 80% of people, or possibly more, support transplantation, and therefore we can assume they are in fact in favour of donation. The short answer to solving this problem is introducing mandatory choice, under which everybody over 18 who is mentally competent is required to state whether they want to donate their organs, whether they don't want to donate their organs, or whether they would prefer to leave that to their family. That way, everybody knows who wants what, and we don't have all this going around the mulberry bush speculating on whether people are being lent upon or whether they're being altruistic or more or less altruistic if money is involved. That would get rid of all those problems.
But people in favour of this system would say it would drastically improve the amount of people donating organs and solve a massive organ shortage. Why could the two proposals not go hand in hand?
Because we're against the principle of paying for organs, because we think there's no way regulations can guarantee that people won't in fact be incentivized really against their interests and their will.
Simon Rippon, do you think that if we did introduce this regulated market, it might undermine the current altruistic donation process?
Well, I think because of the crowding out effect that's been measured in the blood markets, it's been repeated experimentally in lots of different contexts. I think that it could crowd out the altruistic market, and that's a danger. So the issue is this: we're in a dilemma. We can have a market and put very weak regulations on which people are allowed to participate in the market, and we might well increase the number of organs available. But the trouble is, a lot of those organs would be coming from people that were under various kinds of pressure to give up their organs, mainly economic pressure. We could have a different kind of market which was very well regulated, where only the rich could participate. And the problem is that none of them would, and you'd crowd out the altruistic donations at the same time. So we're in a bind. If you want to introduce a market, you also want to introduce the regulations, but the regulations would undermine the effectiveness of the market.
Professor Nadey Hakim?
I agree with Simon. I think the way to stop this abuse of donors is that to forbid, for instance, a British citizen to go to any other country and get a kidney. It should be only restricted to the nationals of that country. So let's say a Filipino needs a kidney. He will get it in the Philippines. There is no way you can abuse the system that way if you get a regulation. Now, going back to what Nick said, and I have to say I cannot agree more that a presumed consent is the solution. Instead of asking as Roger is asking, to ask the question to everyone: do you or do you not want to be a donor? We should all be presumed donors unless we say no. This is what presumed consent is all about. And I think this is the way forward. And that's how they do it in Spain. And this is how they do it in many other European countries, France, Germany, and Belgium.
Would you abandon the regulated market of people selling their organs in favour of this consent?
No, this is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get to this first. And then the second one will be probably, compensating patients. But first, let's get the presumed consent. And the previous government in the UK wanted it done, and everybody was supportive. But the conclusion, surprisingly, was against it. But if you look at the text, which is 100 pages...
let's bring Roger in here.
Because when people found that the state was treating organ donation as a duty rather than as a freely given gift, they would become very resentful.
Professor Hakim?
Well, you see, I do not agree with this. I think...
Well, it's actually correct. And in fact, the Professor Matazans, the head of the organ donation service in Spain, is on the record as saying that presumed consent is a red herring. They introduced it in Spain, and for 10 years it made no difference at all. Why Spain is so successful is they have the intensive care beds, they have highly trained transplantation coordinators, and these people give people the time they need to make the decisions that are right for them. They do not operate on the basis that donation is an obligation and you should be lent upon to do it. You should only do it if that is what you feel is right for you.
See, we have very, very well-trained transplant coordinators in the UK, and we have a lot of intensive care beds, but I know that some of the Spanish say, well, it's not because of the presumed consent that they've got the highest rate of donation, but, it's a bit illogic what they're talking about. I still think a presumed consent, the way it is in other European countries, is the way forward, and I doubt it very much if it doesn't happen soon.
And Nick Triggle, let's bring you in here. Professor Hakim said this is the first step is the consent, and the second step might then be the buying and selling of organs. This is all about trying to ease the public in very slowly.
Yes, I mean, I think Professor Hakim is right that back in 2008, the task force, when they made the decision, there was some surprise because all the indications, and I remember reporting on it at the time, the indications were that they were going to be in favour of presumed consent. And it's a debate that's been happening in the UK for 10, 15 years, really, a full-on debate. The British Medical Association has been calling for a system of presumed consent since 1999. So that there is a momentum there. Whether it will ever result in a change in the law, we will have to see.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you to all of my guests. Professor Nadey Hakim, a transplantation surgeon. Simon Rippon is a research fellow at the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. Nick Triggle is a health correspondent for the BBC. And joining us over the phone was Roger Goff from Patient Concern.